Right, on the podcast, should you be sacked for protesting in front of a politician? If you stand there and abuse a politician, should you lose your job? The thought of this is chilling? I reckon it is. Let's go.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan, Garner.
Okay, welcome to the podcast. I'm Duncan, Garner. Good to have you along. Please subscribe as well. Just hit the button there, okay? Like North Korea and like Russia, if you protest against your government, you will go missing. Never seen again. De-limbed, organs harvested, and you're gone booger. That's what happens in places. Iran probably too. You'd be literally gone. So what should happen here in New Zealand? It's a good question. If you call Winston Peters a fucking moron to his face on the way to work, what should happen to you? Well, for the man that did this week, I'd say they're about to sack him, I'd say. And the Free Speech Union says that is wrong, and they will join me very, very shortly. So let's go.
It's the Slam Dunk.
Okay, so this bloke from this engineering firm, Duncan and Taylor, couldn't resist the urge to rip into Winston Peters, calling him well, we all know this now, it's a fucking moron, right? He stood in front of Peters as he dished it out, reportedly saying, well, that's bollocks, to whatever Peters was saying, and Peters returned fire saying, you look like bollocks. Peters loves this stuff, you know. I found myself quietly relieved, finally, that we had at least one citizen left in New Zealand who wasn't attached to a device, walking to work with his head down and stuck in a social media account. This bloke had done something really seen these days, very unusual. He looked up, he looked around, and didn't like what he saw. And here he was, perhaps forgetting he was sporting a Duncan and Taylor lanyard around his neck, letting Peters know what he really thought of him. I mean, this is old-fashioned. Clearly he was aware he was in his own time, so that's fine, no workplace. Commuting to the office, he was in his own time. And no one would stop him, or could stop him, having his 60 seconds in the limelight. Besides, what could possibly go wrong? He was on the way to work. He wasn't afraid to show his face. He clearly hadn't given it much thought. And no one would recognise him, right? I mean, this won't take long. And he also wanted to prove, if only to himself, that he was no backside kisser or ass kisser. You know, it's not every day you stumble across Winston Peters as you head to work. So let's give it to him. Firstly, Peters, he doesn't do mornings anyway, so you very rarely see him in the mornings. And secondly, ministers standing in front of train stations with huge cheques is quite unusual because largely for 30 years we've gone out there and closed down stations. So he told Peters just what he really thought of him. Winston grinned. And at that moment, it would guarantee him the top slot on the news that night. Job done for Peters, not bad. Aged 80, getting paid a big ministerial salary and New Zealand superannuation at the same time. Peters lives for these moments. Chance to look like he's a real tough guy who's unafraid of what comes next, you know. And the heckler too was an old school sort of brave old guy. Yeah, maybe slightly stupid, but certainly not some faceless coward in a dark room hunched over a computer, you know, tapping away using a fake name. This was a man of deep principle, clearly, meaning he had something to say, even if he hadn't given it much thought. But the Deputy Prime Minister, he's layers deep on this sort of stuff, 40 years deep when it comes to, being an expert or having a master's in verbal abuse, you know. He gave it back and then some. I doubt Peters needed workplace counselling. You know, when you get work offers you workplace counselling? Yeah. I don't think the boffins at Parliament offered Peters workplace counselling. He's still at the centre of everything, this guy. And here's the problem for old loose lips from engineering. And this is why he's now really upset, apparently. Really upset, and he's terribly sorry for his behaviour. Duncan and Taylor, who he works for, do government work. They're an infrastructure company. And they have had and will have contracts for decades with all shades of governments of the day. Oh my God, whoops. And the employee in question, called the rail minister, a fucking moron to his face. It's not great when you think about it. It's no wonder Duncan and Taylor rushed a hugely breathless, unreserved apology into the media. They needed to get ahead of this and start controlling the mess. But was it too soon, given that they're investigating what actually happened? That's what they say they are. For the company, it had to act, didn't they? Peters had just announced, this is the worst bit, he just announced $600 million of new cash for railway projects that companies like Duncan and Taylor will bid for. Oh dear, the employee in question must be wondering how he turned an easy stroll into work into one massive ticking time bomb. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And Peters has suggested they might want to consider the North Korean approach, which is to get rid of him. And there it is. Peters has no official role or say in any of this, but he punched down, didn't he? And it makes it hard to hang on to this guy now. And Duncan and Taylor will, of course, like some of those contracts to come their way in the future, so they may have to get rid of this guy as a result. They're a well-respected company in a town like Wellington. They're only there, really, because their biggest client occupies the beehive. And the work is ongoing and varied. It never ends. It's big checks and it's lucrative because infrastructure contracts are really very small. In a town like Wellington, the only work around right now is with the government, and firms spend huge sums of time and money on staying sweet with those in power. Certainly it's not helpful drawing attention to yourself for all the wrong reasons, like this joker did. You know, it's a bit like that wetsuit analogy that I sometimes use. He would have felt great at the time. You fucking moron! Go to hell, Peters! Feels good at the time, except it's a long day and even longer night because people found out. It's pointless upsetting this government. It's best if you just get on and do the job for them that they required, quite frankly. And there's another thing too about Duncan and Taylor. They are what the right here would call woke. They're part of this new wave of companies that are proudly telling us that they're diverse, and they're falling over themselves to tell people that they love diversity. They just got the rainbow tick, and they've got, they're proud to have gay staff, straight staff, they have neurodiverse workers, and it's their job to make sure that they provide a safe workplace where people are respected and allowed to be themselves. This is great. The more I read about them, the more I thought they were a counselling service, but, they actually did mention infrastructure at one stage. Duncan and Taylor don't abuse people to their face, is what I'm saying. They embrace cultures of inclusion. Hence why they were mortified when they saw that one of their workers had gone off script on the way to the office. Had old Mr. Loose Lips not signed up to the various diversity courses that were available in the office? If he had, he hadn't been listening, had he? Duncan and Taylor chose a PR-first approach. Say sorry, apologise for the unprofessionalism, and do it again and again. Just keep repeating the apology. They were saying how deeply sorry they were for what happened. You bet they were. It's budget week. Billions of dollars of infrastructure projects are up for grabs. The employee hadn't thought things through, really, when he mouthed off. He failed to connect the significance of calling a senior minister an offensive name and how that might then play out for a company that is proudly modern and who works with the government. You couldn't design this any worse. The last thing the company needs is for this to become a mistake that costs them millions into the future in contracts they should have had. So it appears like the PR division of the company took over and they started being publicly very sorry. But hang on. Don't we have free speech in New Zealand? Free speech still matters, right? And the employee now is under investigation. He's got rights. For instance, shouldn't it be okay to heckle a politician in such a public space? Of course it's okay. We've got a long, proud history of this protest. Protesters have abused politicians and vice versa for as long as anyone can remember. The Hikoi protesters told David Seymour he was a right prick, and they never lost their jobs. I once worked with a cameraman at TVNZ who joined the 2004 Destiny Enough is Enough march at Parliament. He'd taken time out from the job, put on the black T-shirt and was seen fist-pumping as they marched on Parliament. The first that we all knew of it, and the bosses knew of it, was we sat down to watch the news out of the office at 6 o'clock. We called out, these are our cameramen. Enough's enough, enough's enough. What can they do about it? Nothing. Hopefully common sense prevails and the employee writes Winston Peters a written apology or something, and they can all move on. That'd be a mature outcome, but I fear for this guy. His employer's already sent him home pending the investigation. It's a bad sign for him. He's now being isolated. He'll be stewing on this, and he's clearly emotional. Duncan and Taylor will go out of their way to keep contracts and relationships with the government first and foremost. The collateral damage in all this will be him. But was it really that bad? I mean, someone in my industry last week called a whole pile of female cabinet ministers the C word. And they didn't even think it needed an apology. The publishers that stuff. Nothing else is ever going to be as gutter as the C-bomb. And the test here is, was this guy representing the company and did his behaviour bring him and the company to disrepute? Companies don't own us, do they? They don't own us 24/7. If you bring your company to disrepute, however, you might find they do have these tentacles that extend deep into your life. So if he loses his job as a result of the inquiry, it could be chilling, couldn't it? I'm watching this closely, and I reckon there's a real big warning in this for all of us.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, joining us now is the Free Speech Union's Nick Hanne. Nick, what do we make of this? What are the concerns and what should happen here? Nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Duncan.
So how do we judge this one? Because it's a really interesting case, isn't it? Going to work.
Yep. Calls
Mr. Peters a fucking moron and a few other things, and now they're investigating him and he may lose his job. Where do you stand on this?
Well, we've tried to be balanced in the sense that there are obviously free speech rights, but there's also then the question of employment relations and how you navigate the reputational aspect. You know, is there damage here to your employer? Where's the line, though? That's the difficulty, all right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have gone, no, employers have every right to control what's said in respect to this stuff. And we're saying, no, you can't just have carte blanche. You can't just say, employers have every right here to
when
control
do they own us?
Reputational damage.
For how long do they own us? So there's weekends, there's nights, there's days, there's all sorts of time when we're not at work. We're not 100% owned by companies. We surely have to have our own space and time. Now, is going to work your own time?
Well, I mean, we would say until you're on the clock,
yeah,
you're in your own time. And if you have a lanyard, this is not like some great big sandwich board that you're carrying around.
Yeah.
It's a lanyard. Now, people can also figure out who you are in 2 minutes on social media.
Exactly right.
So
people say worse things on social media. There are thousands of messages daily abusing people on social media.
Yeah, well, and anonymity is a thing of the past. We don't have it anymore. If you're exposed in any way, not just on TV cameras, but I mean anybody at all with a smartphone, you're going to be found out. So that raises some really challenging questions in the social media age.
Well, it also raises questions in a contractual age as well. So
yes,
because a law is a contract. So has he broken a law? You have a right to freedom of association.
Yep.
We have a right in New Zealand, dearly held, that you're allowed to speak out.
Yep.
And it's not North Korea. So
correct.
I would have thought that he's in the clear, except the company itself is very modern in its approach to these things. It wants safe workplaces and diversity and everything. And the company he works for has government contracts and infrastructure.
Yep. Yeah, was it unwise?
This is the problem.
Yeah, was it unwise for this guy to do this? Yeah,
Yep.
probably. Yeah.
He's apologised today profusely.
Yep.
And he's really upset.
Yep.
And I'm sure he is, because it's dawned on him a moment of madness.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to emphasise that we're not sort of saying, hey, look, let's get really vulgar and coarse and just go around calling people C words and using the F word and whatever else, right? Yeah. We need to elevate discourse in this country, especially in politics.
Yes.
And the temperature is just climbing and climbing, and no one seems to be able to kind of be more moderate over these things.
No, but the issue for this is could be precedent setting as well, because it's actually one of those. It's quite a test now, I think, because in North Korea, if you do this, you'll go missing.
Yep.
In New Zealand, if you do this, is the answer now you'll lose your job? Because that's a big leap.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a basic rule of thumb for the layperson. Because it's all very well to say, well, employment law is going to ensure that you're going to get caught either way. Well, that's not fair. That's not fair on the average person. No. They need to have a general sense of what they can do outside of their normal work hours.
Except in this case, it's a political town. It's highly politically charged.
It's Wellington. Everyone's connected.
Wellington. It's government money. It's contracts.
Of course. It's a private company, but they've got government contracts. Who could you say that about, though, with any large company in this country?
Well, there are public servants that work for all sorts of government departments and associations and all sorts of things that have turned up to Hikoi year after year.
Yep.
Huge numbers of them.
Yep.
I know these people. One minute they're working for a government agency, next minute they put another hat on and they're with a union and they're in front of a Hikoi. Calling David Seymour a prick.
And again, there's got to be some principled stance here when it comes to working as a civil servant. If you're in the public, the public sector, then you do have an obligation to be politically neutral in carrying out, your day-to-day job. When you're talking about, though, a private company, or even if you're talking about a public sector worker, outside of their normal role, if they want to express their political opinion in certain situations, they can. There are, of course, guidelines around that. There are sort of rules around that that are well established.
Yeah.
But I think here in this case, it's not enough to say, well, they've got government contracts, and therefore Winston Peters can basically control the narrative and controls this public space, which is, by the way, a railway station.
That's right. Yep. And there's not many left. And the other thing is, in contracts, there are certain things like if you bring the company to disrepute.
Yep.
And that's a standard clause. Now, when do you bring a company to disrepute? When you go into a nightclub and shoot 16 people dead? Probably. They'll find out where you work. But, where's the disrepute line?
Well, that's right. And I think part of the problem, again, is that this issue was kind of has snowballed. It was just a guy walking past heckling, right? Admittedly, very rudely, very, very coarse language, but
I think Mr. Peters can deal with that.
Yeah, sure, but he didn't seem to be too fussed. He walked away with a grin on his face.
Yeah.
But the point is more that if he's doing that, then at what point can a company claim reputational damage? Right? Do they need to say it's because he was there waving their banner around? Well, he wasn't actually waving their banner around. Just people went, oh, he works for Duncan.
Yeah.
But that's not really him publicising it. And he's not saying anything on behalf of the company.
No,
he's not claiming
he wasn't speaking for the company.
Yeah, he was just venting. Now, I think the difficulty here is that reputational damage could extend as far as you want it to if you're an employer and you have the money to push it in the courts.
Yeah. So this is why I think it's dangerous, because there's creep here. There's scope creep and that sort of thing. We've seen it with the Destiny March.
Yep.
We saw it there, and they basically drawn and quartered that guy in the process of getting to him. Basically,
yep.
Announcers went on here and said, "We're really sorry about this guy's views. Well, why? He's allowed his views.
Sure.
Like, I wonder if the Bill of Rights here comes into it.
Well, the Bill of Rights Act is very important. I mean, there are some carve-outs. There's some provisions made, whether it's public sector or whether it's, if you're acting in terms of contracts and employment law, are you acting deliberately against your employer, undermining their credibility, their reputation, and so on. We don't dispute that. There's, of course, good rules around that. I think the other thing, though, that needs to be emphasised here is, that the nature of political discourse, if it's controlled by big corporates, if it's controlled by companies, or if it's just controlled by big cancel culture, online mobs, it's doing something that harms our democracy. Now, we're not suggesting that the way he carried on was beneficial to democracy, but we have to allow these sorts of this sort of lashing out at times, because we need that line somewhere, and he gets away with it in one sense, but he doesn't get away with it socially. He's already been dragged through the mud. Everyone's seen who he is, knows his backstory.
He's apologised. How much blood do we want to draw out of this guy? And, and I'm worried that we have we've got this culture now of let's get him.
Absolutely.
Let's get the pitchforks and get him.
Well, and that's the trouble. The left may do it one day, and then the right going to do it the next day.
That's right.
And no one's going to stop and say, actually, I'm going to be responsible here and not engage in this type of...
Well, Winston said he wouldn't be unhappy if he lost his job. I think Winston's going too far there and punching down on a guy.
Yep.
He's a deputy prime minister. Winston doesn't need a view on that.
Well, we were pretty surprised last night, his statements around, coarse, vile language somehow not being free speech. I mean, I'm afraid to say it. I'm surprised.
Wow.
That a former lawyer and a long-time government minister would have that attitude, that view of free speech.
It's when it suits them. See, if that protester had gone and called, if that was Chris Hipkins having an announcement about Labour's rail policy, and that guy came and said, "Hipkins, you're a fucking moron," Winston Peters and the guys in the beehive would have stood there and gone, "It's politics." But now it doesn't suit them.
Yep.
Winston Peters was at his State of the Nation speech recently, and in Christchurch, and there were hecklers and all sorts of protesters, and he was throw them out, get rid of them. And it was theatre for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, again, is a little bit different because, of course, it was a private venue where people were there by invitation.
Yeah,
and
it's a public space.
Yeah, this is a public space. And if you deliberately hold a media stand-up event in the middle of the capital's railway station...
Well, it's actually the walk through the thoroughfare.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to go and do that and there's all these people coming through, you've got to be ready for something unpredictable to happen.
Well, you almost... So, the minister's ready to get out of the office for good reason.
Yeah.
But they stood in the way of these people. These people couldn't help but see them. Now, there's going to be someone with a beef,
Yeah.
I think probably in this case, he's thought about it more now and he's a bit embarrassed that he did it.
Yeah.
But he just had a spur of the moment, sort of surge of blood to the head. That's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And workers can't keep... I mean, if this guy loses his job, my view is that we become a step closer to North Korea. And I think it's really dangerous.
It's going to have a big chilling effect.
Yeah.
And I think that just even having this debate has been helpful in one sense. Although I don't think that the way that the journalists who were present, some of them really drove this whole, who is this guy, and let's find out about him. And
gotcha.
They didn't really need to do that, and I think Winston Peters didn't need to also engage in that because he then said, we've done our own research and all this kind of stuff. Why does it matter? It's a guy walking past being an idiot.
Yeah, and that's right. And I've covered all this stuff for 30 odd years, and I've seen MPs carry guys out of meetings. I've seen them get abused. I've seen people get. I mean, Trevor Mallard smacked Tohina in the face in Parliament.
Yep.
A journalist recently called a bunch of ministers cunts. There's no shortage of abuse going both ways, and the journalism he hasn't even apologised for that.
I find it a bit strange that Winston could have just gone, I'll be the better man here, and laugh it off, shrug it off, walk away, and let others condemn the guy for what he's done.
Laugh. Winston's got a great thing of laughing at people.
Yeah,
laugh at him.
Yep, and I think that would have been a great statement. I think it would have said a lot to our young people about actually how to handle that type of abuse from someone. Instead, I don't know, we've gone down this track of making these really, really broad statements about how free speech doesn't allow you to say anything rude.
And I fear that this guy's now going to be made an example of because it just suits everyone.
Yeah,
and I think that's really dangerous.
Yep.
It's really worrying. I'm more focused on this one than any of the other recent cases. I think this one's classic.
Well, I agree. I mean, what we're trying to say here is that this does set a cultural precedent.
Yeah.
Yep, there are going to be the ins and outs of employment law and all of that.
Yeah.
And we respect that. We're not saying that employers have no say over how people act if they're working, on their behalf.
I wonder if the court would side with them.
That's where it gets blurry, though, and I think we need to be a little bit more careful about jumping in and saying we control you even outside of your work hours.
Yeah. But even apologising as well. They were very quick to say, it's us, we're sorry.
They can if they want,
Yeah, but is it personal grievance material after that, because does it look like he's been now...
Yeah, I mean, they are jumping the gun a bit, and they're sort of hanging him out to dry by doing that, right? Without really getting a full, probably story, the full story.
This is one guy. This is one guy, right? One guy of limited resource, probably.
Yeah. Versus
now the media and the state.
Yeah.
Yep. Because that's where it's at. Because the media want their gotcha moment,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a bit disappointing too. That journalists who were there kind of understood how it played out, but then wanted to turn this into another story or sort of a spin-off. And
this is what happens when one person wants to do that, then they all follow like a pack.
Yeah,
We've all been in that mentality.
Yep.
So we stand by because they've got an investigation, so we should know shortly what happens to this guy.
Yep, that's right.
And hopefully there'll be some clarity on that too, because we need to see that. We need to know this now.
Sure.
Yeah. Nice to talk to you. All the best.
Thank you, Duncan. Cheers.
Thank you.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, that's us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks. Thank you for your feedback and support. Get in touch through our social media at Duncan Garner Podcast on TikTok and Instagram, or flick us an email, duncan@rover.nz. To my team, thank you, Isaac. Hope you're doing all right, brother. And we'll do it again on Monday. Remember, life's no dress rehearsal. No curtain raiser. No nothing. No tats cut. No, it doesn't matter. This is it. We live in one of the best places on earth. Get out and enjoy the rest of it. Take care.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.